Hi, this is Marcus Schaller, and today I wanted to talk to you about focus, specifically about the problem that you focus on solving and who exactly you're going to solve that for. The reason it's so important is because a lot of times when we create our marketing materials, whether it's our website or sales letters, we have a tendency to not really look at it from the perspective of the people that are going to be potentially your clients. We get so wrapped up in what we do, and we really obviously care about what we do. We're very passionate about that. Sometimes it's difficult to really filter that down into a specific set of solutions and really communicate that really in the language of the people that are going to become your clients. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do is I want you to stop and ask yourself a very simple question. What is the problem I solve, and who exactly do I solve that for? And it's kind of an elusive question. It's misleading a little bit because everybody tends to think that they've answered that, but a lot of times when I ask people, what problem do you solve, they'll start talking about, well, we provide this kind of service, and they kind of get into the solution. And I ask that you stop for a second and kind of take a step backwards and start first with, before you solve anything, you have to have a very clear idea of what that problem is. For a couple of reasons. First of all, it gives you a much better idea of the right solution for that problem, but it also helps stop for a second and kind of frame your whole marketing. What it does is it really forces you to frame your message based on the context of the problem, the whole point of why your service exists, of why people are going to pay you money to help them solve it. And it's a really useful exercise because what happens is if you can define the problem accurately and you can be very clear about what that is, it makes the rest of your marketing much easier to accomplish. So for example, if you start out with the problem I solve is blank, all right, and let's think for a second about what that would be. And you might come up with actually a few answers. You might come up with actually a list of different problems that you solve, and that by itself isn't bad. That's a good thing. You want to start off with, as long a list as necessary. But I want you to try something a little different. Once you come up with that list, I want you to stop and I want you to look at that list for a few minutes. And I want you to ask yourself, which of these problems is the most important problem that I solve? Which of these problems is most relevant to my clients, to the market that I serve? Which of these problems is kind of that tip of the spear problem that's what's going to get you in the door? It's going to get that conversation started with a prospect. And that's what's going to lead to you getting that new project or to landing the new client. The other problems that you solve can be very important. But when it comes to communicating, when it comes to what you're actually going to write on your website, what you're actually going to write on a sales letter, what you're actually going to say to somebody when you meet them in an event or when you speak to a group, it's very important that that be very clear. And if you start with a whole list of problems that you tackle, it makes it that much more difficult for you to be able to kind of sum that up into one clear statement that's going to get that conversation started. And again, that's really the whole point of this. Business development, marketing, lead generation, it's really about connecting with somebody and just getting that conversation started. Once you have that conversation started and you start asking your potential client what it is that they're challenged with, and you start getting into that, then you can start getting a little bit more creative in how you can help solve it. But for just the purposes of starting with that message, I want you to sum it up. I want you to think about what is that specific problem that you solve. And again, starting with what's the most important one, what's the one that's most relevant to your client base, your market, and then finally, which is the one that would be a good introductory problem, and it's going to get you in the door and get that conversation started. So picture for a second that you haven't done this. Picture for a second, your website the way it is now. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. Most likely you've created it yourself, or you've worked very closely with somebody to develop your website, and you've probably written all the material on there, whether it's the content or the home page, the About Us page, the Solutions page. And I want you to think about that content, maybe look at it right now, look at your website, and ask yourself, if you were coming and looking at that website for the first time and you had no idea who you were, and you were, somebody in your market, what would you think of that? Not just the website itself, but what about you're communicating? What about what you're solving on there would really draw you in? I want you to be very honest with yourself about it, because I know it's hard to look at it through those fresh eyes, but it's a very important step in making sure that all your communications are really engaging people and really connecting with people, rather than just being a brochure that's online and at least you have the website done, and at least that's like a project that you don't have to worry about. You really want to make sure it's a very powerful tool for you. And a lot of cases now, your website is kind of your core tool. It's kind of the hub of everything else you do. Even if you meet somebody at a networking event or you speak in front of the group, a lot of times they'll go to your website first, and that's really where they're going to get the information about who you are and what you do and why it would matter to them. And that's, again, the main point of this. So I want you to think about your website, look at it, and really be brutally honest with yourself and ask yourself, are you trying to communicate too much with it, either by having a whole laundry list of every type of solution that you offer and all these different problems that you could solve, or are you being too vague with it? So for instance, if you just get into kind of platitudes about being an industry leader in consulting with large, middle-sized, and small firms alike, and all that kind of language that unfortunately really just doesn't connect with people. It really doesn't engage anybody. It's very standard. You see a lot of it, and unfortunately a lot of people kind of follow that lead and think that that's appropriate business speak. And I want you to think outside that right now. I want you to think about how you can be very professional, but at the same time be relevant to people. And so ask yourself, are you just kind of running down every possible thing that somebody might be coming to that page about? And if you are, think of it this way: if I'm an individual, you're an individual coming to my website, or vice versa, I have one specific problem, or I have maybe two specific problems. If that website, if the content on that site does not speak to that right away, very quickly, then you're going to lose me. I'm not going to necessarily take the time to go through pages of everything you possibly do. So that's where it becomes difficult a lot of times, because you really do have to commit. You really do have to make a decision between this or the other thing. And the other, point about whether or not your site is too vague, in the sense of, we provide consulting for services to help companies, blank, 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 and it's kind of vague, it's kind of generic. Again, same problem. Somebody coming to that site, they don't look at their problems as generic. They look at it as it's real and it's specific, and they're looking, when they're searching online or they're going to your website, they're looking for something that's going to really kind of hook and really show them that there's something worth pursuing on that site. And if they don't, they're gone. There's a lot of missed opportunities in that. Good news is the solution's actually pretty easy. Again, it starts with what is your problem and being very specific about that. The second thing is kind of taking it a step further and asking yourself, who are the people specifically that have that problem? So now you're starting to narrow down your market. You can't reach everybody. Focusing on small to large companies or mid-sized firms or whatever, it's too large. It's thousands or millions of companies. I mean, it's just way too large of a demographic for you to truly target. So there's obviously lots of ways for you to kind of segment your market, but I want you to just think about, like, who would really be your ideal client, and based on the problem you solve. So the next step would then be, how do I communicate that? Now, that's where we get into content a lot of times. The content, if you're creating content that solves a specific problem, that's, in my opinion, one of the best ways to engage with people, because beyond just telling them what you do, you're essentially getting into the business of solving it for them, at least starting to. A video, a webinar, a white paper by itself might not solve the problem, but it's not designed to. It's going to start solving that problem. It's going to take them down that road where they want a solution, and it's hopefully a tool that they see and they recognize it's going to provide some value and help them get down that road and start tackling that problem or challenge. So again, without understanding what your problem is that you solve, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to come up with relevant content. So Content's one way of doing it. The other way, obviously, is if you have in your home page or your About Us page, if you can very concisely say what it is you do, the problem you solve, and who you solve it for, in a paragraph, in 2 sentences, 3 sentences at most, you're going to be light years ahead of, in my opinion, 95% of the other firms that are doing the same thing or solving the same problem. Because while they're trying to really be everything to everybody, you've now honed in on one group. So if you have a hypothetical customer client out there, prospect, looking at different pages, looking at different possible vendors, the more relevant you are to that one person, the more likely it is that you're going to really engage that person and start that conversation. And again, that's what we're really talking about. It's about relevance, and it's about what you can accomplish clearly. Final thought on this, specifically if you're an independent consultant or you're in a small firm, you're the principal of a small firm, this is even more important, because the truth of the matter is your marketing budget, your advertising budget, all these things that would engage a large market are all very limited. If you look at the people and the small firms, the individuals, kind of the rock stars out there that are very well-known consultants and have a very healthy following, a very healthy client list, you'll notice that they tend to focus on one thing. They're definitely specialists. I look at hundreds of websites a week, professional service firms' websites, and I notice the trend of most of them, they want to look really big. And by itself, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem with it when it comes to engaging people is that as a small firm, you don't really need to have a massive market. So for most people that sell professional services, if it's consulting, for example, one engagement might be $30,000, $50,000, $15,000, whatever it is. Really, to be successful as an independent consultant or a very small firm, you're talking about maybe 10 engagements a year, 12, 15, 20, in that range. Much easier to be able to fill that quota, to be able to fill that pipeline when you're very focused on a specific problem, a specific market. Now, conversely, if you're talking about a very large consulting firm, now you're talking about this mechanism that needs to be fed, and you have many departments and probably dozens or hundreds of consultants, and now you're talking about there is a true need for them to be able to have a wide variety of services and problems that they solve. But they also generally, hopefully, have the budget and the manpower and the marketing expertise to be able to properly engage the right markets for that, where their website might simply be a portal, but there's many, many things going on behind the scenes that I don't see, that you don't see, that are very targeted and very specific to different markets. So when you look at examples of other sites and you look at your own company and you look at how you want to grow and where you want to be, it's natural to kind of mimic that, the larger firms, because that's what you maybe aspire to. But just keep in mind that at the stage you're in, it's much more important to mean something to a smaller group of people and win that business, capture those projects. That's going to make it much easier for you to grow. And then as you go on further, as you grow, that's when you can start expanding.